At 19, Cole Rennick had $47, a canvas duffel with a broken zipper, and a bus shelter on Front Street that was not his but that no one else wanted. He had slept there 11 nights. He knew the schedule of the streetlight across the road, the way it buzzed before it went dark at some hour past midnight, and he knew which bench slat was cracked and which was not. He kept his money folded flat in his sock. 2 20s, a 5, 2 1s. He had counted it that morning the way he counted it every morning. Not because it changed, but because counting it was the one thing in his life he could still finish. 10 days earlier, the state had turned 19 for him, in a manner of speaking. That was how it felt. He had aged out. There was a form and a signature, and a woman named Ms. Pruitt who had driven him from the last placement to the county building and told him, kindly enough, that the system did not go past 18 and that he had already been given a grace year for finishing his diploma. She had handed him a folder. Inside were his birth certificate, a bus pass good for the month, and a printed list of shelters, none of which were in Halden. He had not cried. He had learned a long time ago that crying was a thing you did in front of people who could do something about it, and there was no one like that left. What he did instead was watch. He watched the town of Halden the way he watched everything, from the edge, with his mouth shut. And that was how, on a gray Tuesday in the first week of March, he came to be standing at the back of a county tax auction, listening to an auctioneer try to give away a grain elevator that no one in the room would touch. He did not yet know whose it had been. He did not know about the bolted door at the base of the 4th silo, or what 40 years of one honest man's handwriting was waiting behind it. He only knew the opening bid was $10, and that he had 47. And that for the first time in 11 nights he had somewhere he wanted to be. The auction was held in the basement meeting room of the Ansel County Courthouse, under fluorescent lights, 2 of which flickered. There were maybe 30 people in folding chairs. Cole stood at the back against the cinder block because he did not feel he had earned a chair. The county held these sales twice a year to clear property that had gone to tax default. Most of it moved fast. A quarter section of dry land went to a man in a seed cap for $11,000. A repossessed camper. A storage lot on the highway. The auctioneer, a heavy man named Del Quinn, who also sold cattle on Thursdays, ran through them in a flat sing-song, and the same 8 or 9 bidders lifted their cards and took what they wanted. Then Quinn came to lot 41. "Now this one," Quinn said, and he paused in a way that told Cole he was about to make a joke of it. "This one's the old Deckard elevator, out on the Santa Fe Spur, north end. Wooden crib. Counties carried the taxes on it 4 years running, and the state wants it off the books." He held up a single sheet. "Structures condemned. Land's a strip, 40 foot each side of the spur, landlocked more or less. No road access to speak of." So, he looked out over the folding chairs and smiled. "Who wants to be a grain baron? Do I hear $100? Nobody moved. 50. A man near the front laughed. Somebody else said something Cole didn't catch, and a few people chuckled. All right, Quinn said. "It's a fire hazard is what it is. County'd near pay you to take it. Do I hear 10? $10, one time, and it's off our hands." Cole had not planned it. He would think about that later, how a thing that would take over his whole life had started with his hand going up before his mind had finished a sentence. But he had been watching the room, and he had understood something in it that the men in the seed caps had not bothered to feel. They were laughing at a building. He had spent 11 nights learning exactly what it was worth to have a roof, any roof, that was yours and that no one could tell you to leave. He raised his hand. 10, he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. The room turned to look at him. 30 faces. He kept his eyes on Quinn. Quinn squinted at the back wall, taking in the duffel bag and the boy holding it. Something crossed his face, and for a second Cole thought he was going to be told to put his hand down, that this was not for him, that a kid sleeping in a bus shelter did not get to own anything with a foundation. But Quinn was a practical man, and $10 was $10 the county did not have. "I got 10, Quinn said. $10 bid, now do I hear 20? Anybody? 20 for a genuine antique grain elevator. Get your picture in the paper." He waited. No one spoke. 10 going once, going twice. A woman in the second row turned around in her chair. She was old, 70 at least, in a canvas coat with a wool collar, and she was not laughing. She looked at Cole for a long moment, the way a person reads a page, and then she turned back around without a word. "Sold," Quinn said. $10, lot 41, to the young man at the back. "Son, see the clerk with a photo ID, and it's yours. God help you." There was a scatter of laughter, and then the room forgot about him and moved on to lot 42, a flatbed trailer with 2 flat tires. Cole went to the folding table by the door where a clerk in a cardigan was taking payments. He unrolled his sock money under the edge of the table so no one would see the rest of it, and he laid down a 5, 4 ones, and dug a dime and 2 nickels from the bottom of the duffel's front pocket. $10 exactly. The clerk counted it without looking up. "Name," she said. "Cole Rennick," she wrote it. She had him sign a quitclaim receipt and stamped it and slid across a photocopy along with a second sheet, a plat map with a thin rectangle inked along the rail line and the words Deckard Elevator in a draftsman's hand. "That's yours now," she said. "Taxes come due in November. $240 a year going forward, if you keep it. You don't pay. It comes right back to us." She finally looked up at him, and her look was not unkind. "You got somewhere to put it?" "It's a building," Cole said. "I figured it stays where it is." The corner of her mouth moved. "I meant you," she said. "But all right." He folded the deed into quarters and slid it into his sock next to the money, which was $37 now. He walked up the courthouse stairs and out into the gray afternoon, and he stood on the top step for a while, looking north, where past the last row of houses and the water tower he could just make out a tall, dark shape against the sky, square-shouldered, leaning slightly, like a man standing at the edge of a field who had been waiting a long time for someone to come. He had a building. He did not have a bed, or a job, or a second pair of boots, or anyone in the world who knew where he was standing at that moment. But he had a building, and a deed folded in his sock, and $37. He shouldered the duffel and started walking north. It was farther than it looked. It was always farther than it looked in flat country, where a thing on the horizon could pull back from you for an hour and never seem to come closer. He walked out Bank Street to where the sidewalk quit, and then along the shoulder of the county road with the wind coming across the stubble fields hard enough to make his eyes run. The last houses of Halden fell behind him. A dog barked from a porch and gave it up. He passed the grain co-op on the edge of town, the modern one, a cluster of bright galvanized bins, and a concrete leg 200 feet tall with Ansel County Cooperative painted down the side in green, and a scale house with a lit window and a line of trucks even in March. That one was alive. That was where the county's wheat went now. His was 2 miles past it, and it had been dead for a long time. He left the road where the old rail spur crossed it, the crossing planks rotted soft and the rails themselves gone brown and pitted, unused so long that a line of little cedars had seated themselves up the middle of the bed. He followed the spur north. The gravel gave under his boots. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and old creosote, and the elevator came up out of the ground ahead of him the way a big thing does when you finally get near it, all at once, taking up more of the sky than he was ready for. It was a wooden crib elevator, the old kind, built the way they built them 100 years ago, out of 2x6s stacked flat and spiked one on top of the next until the walls were solid timber, a foot thick. It stood maybe 70 feet to the peak of the headhouse, sheathed in corrugated steel gone the deep red-brown of dried blood, streaked black where the water ran. 4 tall silos in a row, and the headhouse riding up above them, and a driveway shed built out over where the trucks had once pulled in to dump. A faded sign along the top, Deckard Grain, Halden, Kansas, and below it, smaller, in letters someone had painted by hand and touched up more than once over the years, fair weight, fair price. Cole stood at the foot of it with his neck bent back and his duffel hanging from his hand and did not move for a while. Up close, it was worse and it was better. Worse because he could see the rot now. The way a whole corner of the driveway shed had sagged and the roof had opened and a long tongue of pigeon-stained ruin ran down the inside wall. 2 of the big windows in the headhouse were broken out. A section of steel siding had peeled loose at the top and hung out over nothing, groaning when the wind took it. Better because the bones of it were sound. He put his hand flat on the timber wall of the first silo, and it did not give. It was solid as a bank vault. Men who did not expect to live long enough to see it fall had built it to outlast them all, and it had. The sliding door on the driveway side was chained, but the chain was looped over a broken hasp, and it came free when he lifted it. The door rolled back a foot on its track and stuck. He turned sideways and went in. Inside it was dim and smelled of dust and old grain and pigeons, and, under all of it, faint and sweet, the smell of wheat, 40 years of wheat ground into every board. Gray light came down in bars from the broken windows far above. He stood in what had been the driveway bay, where the trucks pulled through, and in the middle of the plank floor was the grated pit where the grain had been dumped, and above him in the gloom he could make out the shapes of the machinery, the boot of the leg, the drive belts hanging slack, the spouts and the distributor head, all of it furred gray with dust and hung with the ragged banners of old. Cobwebs, and on the wall by the office door, where a man would see it every time he came and went, hung a coat. It was a canvas chore coat, brown, worn pale at the cuffs and the elbows, hung on a single bent nail. Below it, on the floor, sat a pair of rubber overshoes, set neatly side by side the way a careful man sets his boots when he means to be back in the morning. A coffee cup stood on the corner of the desk inside the office window, and whatever had been in it had dried to a brown ring and then to nothing at all, years ago. A calendar hung crooked on the office wall. Turned to a month Cole had to step closer to read. February. The year was 4 years gone. He understood then, without anyone having to tell him, that the man who owned this coat had walked out of this building one ordinary winter day, meaning to come back, and had not come back, and that no one had been here since to take the coat down off its nail. He did not touch it. It did not feel like his to touch. He set his duffel down on the driest patch of floor he could find, in the corner of the office where the roof still held, and he sat down beside it with his back against the timber wall, and for a long time he just listened to the wind work at the loose steel far above him and the pigeons shift in the dark, and he thought that this was the first place in his life that no one could tell him to leave. That first night he was cold in a way he had a word for by now. He had learned the different colds. There was bus shelter cold, which was open on 3 sides and never let you forget the world was watching you sleep. This was different. This was closed in, cold, dry and deep, the cold of a stone church, and once he had zipped the duffel's spare shirt over his chest and pulled his knees up and got his back into the corner where 2 timber walls met, he found it was a cold he could stand. He counted his money before he slept. $37. He knew the number. He counted it anyway. By feel, in the dark. Then he folded it back into his sock, and he slept, and no one moved him along. He woke at first light to a floor of pigeons and a square of pale sky in every broken window, and the enormous silence of a building that had been holding its breath for 4 years, and had decided, apparently, to let a boy stay. The first days he did not do much but survive, and he did that carefully, the way he did everything. He walked the 2 miles back into Halden in the morning and spent $1.89 at the discount grocery on a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, and he made that last. He filled a plastic gallon jug from the spigot on the side of the Halden Co-op scale house before anyone was in and carried it back out the spur. Water was the thing that ran out first when you had nothing, and he had learned to think about it before he was thirsty. He counted the money down as it went. $1.89 for the bread. $2 for a box of wooden matches and a stub of candle. 37 had become 33, and he wrote the numbers in his head and did not let himself round them off, because rounding off was how a person with nothing convinced himself he had more than he did. The town watched him and did not warm to him. Word had gone around, the way it does in a place the size of Halden, that the boy from the bus shelter had bought the old Deckard place for $10, and people did not know what to make of it, and so they made the thing they always make of what they don't understand, which is distance. At the grocery, the woman at the register set his change on the counter instead of in his hand. On the street, men looked at his duffel and his one coat and did the arithmetic and looked away. He was not from a family they knew. In Ansel County, that was most of what a person was, the family they came from, and Cole had come from a folder in a caseworker's car. He did not blame them. He had watched people his whole life, and he knew that a stranger with nothing frightened the comfortable more than a stranger with a gun, because the stranger with nothing was a question they did not want to answer. He tried for work anyway, because $33 was a number that only went one direction if you left it alone. He went to the feed store and asked, and to the 2 gas stations, and to a man loading calves who needed the help but not from a boy he didn't know. At the modern co-op on the edge of town, he stood in the scale house doorway during the morning rush and asked the man running the ticket window if they took on hands for the harvest. And the man looked at him and said they'd already hired their fall crew back in July, which Cole understood to mean no, and understood also, from the way the man's eyes went past him to the trucks, that there was no version of the sentence in which the answer was yes. He got 3 days out of a rancher named Pletcher, forking silage and mending fence, $40 a day, cash, and Pletcher paid him honest at the end of each day and did not ask where he slept. And those 3 days were the difference between a boy with $33 and a boy with $153, and Cole kept the $120 like it was a seam of coal he was working, spending it $1 and a can at a time. He did not tell Pletcher about the elevator, and Pletcher did not ask, and Cole liked him for it more than for the money. He did not blame the town. He had watched people his whole life, and he understood that the distance would close or it would not, and that either way it was not his to hurry. So he went back out the spur each evening to the one place that had not looked at his duffel and done the arithmetic, and let the town make up its mind in its own time. So he kept to the spur and the elevator and made it a little more livable each day. He swept the office floor with a broom he found stiff with age in the corner. He nailed a flattened feed sack over the worst of the broken window. He found, in a lean-to off the driveway shed, a wealth of things a working man leaves behind. A coil of good rope, a box of mixed hardware, a hand saw, 3 kerosene lanterns, and half a can of fuel, a cot frame with the canvas rotted through that he restrung with the rope. Every object he touched had been set down by careful hands and left in order, and the more of them he handled, the more the absent man took shape around him, a man who did not waste, who put things back, who labeled his coffee cans of bolts in a small square hand. On the 4th night the dog came. He heard it before he saw it, a scratching and then a low, uncertain whine from the direction of the driveway pit. He lit the candle stub and went out with it cupped in his hand and found, wedged in the dry space under the old driveway scale where the platform met the pit wall, a dog. It was a brown shepherd mix, thin, its ribs a ladder under a coat matted with burrs, one ear torn old and healed crooked. It did not run. It did not come to him either. It lay in its den under the scale and watched him with the flat, wary patience of an animal that had also learned, somewhere, that the thing to do with people was watch them and keep your mouth shut. Cole knew that patience. He recognized it the way you recognize your own face in a bad photograph. He did not reach for the dog. He tore off a corner of his bread and set it on the plank floor halfway between them and went back inside and left the door open a foot. In the morning, the bread was gone, and the dog was still there, farther out from under the scale now, lying in the bar of light from the doorway. It took 4 days. On the 4th, Cole was sitting on the driveway sill, eating his lunch when the dog came and lay down 3 feet from him, facing the field, not looking at him, the 2 of them side by side watching the wind move over the stubble like something that would go on doing it forever. Cole tore off half his bread and set it down between them, and the dog took it, gently, and that was the whole of it. That was the contract. Neither of them said anything because neither of them had ever gotten much from saying things. He called the dog Barley because it seemed to belong to the place, and because a thing with a name was harder for the world to take away. The woman came on the 9th day. He heard the truck before he saw it, a low straining engine and the crunch of tires taking the spur slow, and when he came out to the driveway door there was an old Ford pickup nosing up the rail bed toward the elevator, white once, faded now to the color of dust, the box rusted through above the wheel wells. It stopped 40 feet off. The engine ticked. A woman climbed down out of the cab, slow, one hand on the door and one on the seat, and Cole knew her at once. The canvas coat with the wool collar, the one who had turned around in the auction and looked at him the way a person reads a page. She stood by the truck and looked up at the elevator for a long moment before she looked at him. "You'd be the one bought it," she said. "Yes, ma'am, for $10. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she had already decided. Barley had come out to stand at Cole's leg, and the dog did not bark, only watched. The woman looked at the dog and something moved in her face. "That's Amos's dog's grandpup, or near it," she said. "There's always been a brown dog under that scale. 40 years there's been a brown dog." She said it to herself more than to him. Then she looked back at Cole. "My name's Verna Stroud. I ran the scale house here. 29 years, right up until they shut it. I weighed for Amos Deckard from 1971 till the day the trucks quit coming." She paused. "I expect nobody in town's told you a thing about the man whose building you're sleeping in." "No, ma'am," Cole said. "The auctioneer called it the Deckard place. That's all I know." Verna Stroud made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "That's all most of them want to know," she said. She looked up at the peak of the head house, at the hand-painted words below the sign. "Fair weight, fair price. You mind if I sit down, son? I don't stand as long as I used to." He brought out the one good chair from the office, and she sat in the driveway doorway out of the wind, and Barley lay down at her feet as though he had known her all his life, which, in some way that Cole did not yet understand, he had. She talked for a long time. Cole did what he did best. He listened. "Amos Deckard ran this elevator 41 years, she said. "His daddy ran a farm south of here, good ground, 1.25, and lost it. 1954. You want to know how a man loses good ground in good years?" She looked at Cole. "A crooked scale. The buyer down at the old coreless elevator had his platform scale rigged. Everybody knew it, and nobody could prove it. And he took 2 and 3 bushels out of every 100 off every man that hauled to him, and off a small farm in a tight year. That's the difference between keeping it and not. Amos watched his father haul his whole crop to a thief because there was nowhere else to haul it, and get paid for 800 bushels what was 1,000, and lose the place a year later. Amos was 14. She stopped and folded her hands in her lap. So when Amos got grown and got his own scale here in Halden, he had one rule, and he ran the whole of his life by it. Nobody got cheated on his scale. Not a bushel, not a pound, not a penny. He tested that scale himself every Monday morning with his own certified weights, and I watched him do it 1,000 times. And if it was off by a hair, he shut the whole place down till the man came from Salina to true it. Farmers hauled past 3 closer elevators to get to Amos, because they knew when Amos's ticket said 1,000 bushels, it was 1,000 bushels, and when it said the number that meant they'd fed their family that year, it was the truth. She nodded. An honest man. That's what people will tell you, the few that'll say anything. Amos Deckard was an honest man. She turned and looked at Cole then, and her eyes were sharp under the wool collar. "But that's not the half of it," she said. "That's the part they know. There's a whole other half to Amos Deckard that this town never knew, and I only knew a corner of, and I've thought for 4 years somebody ought to find the rest of it before this building falls down and takes it with him." She put her hands on her knees and pushed herself up to stand. "He wasn't who people thought, son. He was more. And if you're going to live in his elevator, I think you'd best find out what he really left in it." "What did he leave?" Cole said. Verna Stroud looked up at the 4 silos standing in their row. "I don't rightly know," she said, "but I know where he spent his evenings, and it wasn't in that office. Times I stayed late doing the tickets. I'd see his lantern light down at the far end, under the 4th bin, hours after the trucks were gone. There's a room down there. A man lift went up inside the 4th silo, years back, and Amos closed off the bottom of the shaft and made himself someplace. He kept it bolted. In 29 years, I never once saw the inside of it." She started back toward her truck, then stopped. "You find the way into that room," she said, "and I believe you'll find the man. The whole of him." She climbed up into the cab, slow, and rolled the window down. "I'll come back Sunday." I'll bring you something hot. A body can't live on bread, and don't tell me you're not. I can see the loaf from here." The engine caught on the second try. "Fair weight, son," she said, which he did not understand yet, and she backed the old Ford down the spur and was gone. The fourth silo was at the far end of the row, the one closest to the dead rail line, and Cole had been past its base a dozen times without seeing anything but timber wall. Now he took a lantern and looked. It took him the rest of that day and part of the next. The bottom of the fourth silo was boxed in below the discharge spout, an added-on room, maybe 10 feet square, its walls the same spiked 2x6 as the silo itself, so that it did not look like a separate room at all, but like more of the solid heart of the building. There was a door. He found it behind a stack of empty seed pallets and a sheet of tin. A steel door, industrial, the kind you'd find on a boiler room, and it was bolted, not locked, 3 heavy sliding bolts. Top, middle, and bottom, and every one of them rusted into its keeper. He worked at them 2 days. He did not have penetrating oil, so he used the last of the kerosene, working it into the bolt tracks with a rag on a stick, and he tapped each bolt with a hammer and a punch he'd found in the lean-to, a little at a time, the way the absent man had taught him without ever meaning to. Patient, no hurry, don't break the thing you're trying to open. The bottom bolt came first, then the top. The middle one fought him until the third evening, when he braced his boot on the timber and put his whole weight low against the punch, and it gave all at once with a screech that sent the pigeons up out of the headhouse in a clattering rush, and the steel door swung in on its hinges into the dark. Barley would not go in. The dog stood at the threshold with his ears up and would not cross it. Cole lit the lantern and went in alone. The air inside was dry and dead still and smelled of machine oil and cold iron. And it was the first air in that whole building that did not smell of ruin, because this room had been sealed and the roof of it was the underside of the silo, and no water had ever gotten in. He lifted the lantern. It was a workshop. A workbench ran the length of one wall, its top worn smooth and dark, and above it a board hung with tools, each in its painted outline, every one in its place. A drill press, a vise, a grinding wheel, a small forge and an anvil in the corner, and along the whole far wall, floor to ceiling, shelves, and on the shelves, in rows, the reason Amos Deckard had spent his evenings down here for 40 years. Ledgers, grade books, bound and stacked and labeled by year in the same small square hand that had labeled the coffee cans of bolts. 41 of them. One for every year he had run the scale, their spines lettered 1971 through 2012, and beside them a second row of books, thicker, unlabeled, and beside those a gray steel cash box the size of a small suitcase, and beside that, at the end, a flat wooden document box with a brass hasp. Cole set the lantern on the workbench and did not touch anything for a long moment. Then he took down the first book, 1971, and sat on the workbench stool that Amos Deckard had sat on, and he opened it, and he began to read. He read that night until the lantern guttered, and he read the next night, and for many nights after, because what was in those books did not give itself up all at once. It came to him in layers, the way the truth about a person always does, each layer changing the meaning of the one before it. The first layer was the grain tickets. The earliest books were exactly what Verna had said they were. A record of an honest scale. Every load that ever crossed Amos Deckard's platform was written down. The date, the truck, the farmer's name, the gross weight, the tear, the net, the moisture, the grade, the price, the total paid. Load after load, year after year, in a hand that never hurried and never smudged. 1,000 entries. 10,000. Cole, who had counted his own money every morning of his life to keep from lying to himself, understood at once that he was looking at the same thing in another man, an honesty kept as a private discipline, a refusal to round anything off. But by the second night he had begun to notice a second column, and that was the second layer, and it stopped his breath. Alongside many of the entries, in the margin, Amos had written a smaller notation, a minus sign, and a figure, and a single word, carried. A farmer would haul in a crop that graded poor, or short, weevily wheat in a wet year. Wheat that by the market price of the day was worth $400 less than the man needed to make his loan payment. And Amos would write the true grade in the ledger, because the ledger did not lie, and then in the margin he would write what he had actually paid the man. And what he had actually paid the man was more. Sometimes a little more. Sometimes, in the bad years, hundreds of dollars more on a single load, and beside it, that word, carried, and the initials AD. He had been making up the difference himself. Cole read on, and the pattern deepened and darkened and became the whole story of the man. In the good years, the carried notations were few, but 1980 was bad, and 1988 was worse, and the drought years in the late 2000s were a slaughter, and in those years the margins of Amos Deckard's ledgers were dense with that small word, page after page, farm after farm, hundreds of them. Carried, carried, carried. He had stood at his honest scale and told every man the true weight and the true grade, because a man deserved the truth about his own crop, and then he had quietly, without a word, out of his own pocket, paid many of them what they needed to survive, instead of what the grain was worth, and written down the difference, and never, as far as Cole could yet tell, collected a dime of it back. That was the third layer, and Cole found it in the gray steel cash box, the fourth night, when he worked the catch and lifted the lid. He had thought it would be money. It was not money, or not the way he expected. It was paper. It was slip after slip after slip, each one in Amos's hand, each one a small accounting of a debt, a name and a figure and a year, the carried balances gathered up out of the ledgers and totaled, the record of what the whole county owed Amos Deckard and did not know it owed. Cole added a few of the columns in his head and had to stop. It ran to tens of thousands of dollars. And clipped to the inside of the lid was a single sheet, folded once, and on it, in the same square hand, a note the man had written to no one or to whoever finally opened the box. Cole read it 3 times. "These are debts," it said, "and they are mine to carry, not theirs to pay. A man cannot eat a true number if the year has starved him. My father hauled an honest 1,000 bushels to a crooked scale and got paid for 800, and it killed him slower than it should have, and I swore on the day we left the place that no man would ever leave my scale cheated, and no man ever has. But a fair weight is not enough by itself. A fair weight tells a man the truth of his crop. It does not carry him through the year. The truth is not enough to live on. So I have carried them. It is between me and the ground I stand on. Whoever finds this, burn these slips. Do not collect them. They were never alone. They were the toll I pay for what was done to my father, and it is paid." It was signed, in full, Amos Deckard, and dated the February of the winter he had died. Cole sat a long time with the note in his hands and the lantern hissing and barley at last come to lie in the doorway with his chin on his paws. Then he reached for the flat wooden document box at the end of the shelf, the one with the brass hasp, because he understood by now that Amos Deckard did nothing without finishing it, and that a man who kept records this complete would not have stopped at slips of paper. And that was the fourth layer, and it was the one that changed everything, though Cole did not yet know how much. Inside the document box were 3 deeds, 3 warranty deeds, recorded and stamped by the Ansel County Register, each one for a quarter section of farmland, and each one telling the same quiet story in the dry language of the law. A farm foreclosed by the bank in a bad year. Bought at the courthouse steps, at the foreclosure sale, by a buyer named Deckard. And then, months later, a second deed, transferring that same land back to the family that had lost it, for the sum of $1 and other good and valuable consideration. 3 times. 3 farms bought out from under the hammer and quietly handed back, for $1, to the people who had worked them, who had gone on working them all these years, believing, Cole understood, that some mercy of the bank or some miracle of the market had saved them, never knowing that the miracle was an old man in a workshop under the 4th silo who had spent everything he had and told no one. Cole closed the box. He sat in the dead-still air of the room where Amos Deckard had spent 40 years of evenings, and he looked at the tools each in its painted outline and the ledgers in their row, and he understood that he had bought, for $10, at a county tax auction, in front of a room of men who laughed, the secret life's work of the best man Ansel County had ever produced, and that not one of the people who had laughed had the faintest idea what stood at the north end of the dead spur, leaning slightly, waiting. Verna Stroud came back that Sunday, and the next, and the ones after. She brought a kettle of beef and barley soup in a coffee can with foil crimped over the top, and a second time a pan of cornbread, and once a wool blanket, army surplus, that she set on the chair without a word about it. She never came inside the workshop, but she sat in the driveway doorway while Cole read her pieces of what he had found, and when he told her about the carried balances, her hands went still in her lap, and when he told her about the 3 deeds, she looked out at the field for a long time, and Cole saw that she was crying, quietly, the way a person cries who has kept a thing to herself for a long time, and just found out it was even bigger than she had guessed. "I knew he carried a few," she said at last. "I'd see him hand a man an envelope by the truck and tell him it was a rebate on the drying charge, and there wasn't any rebate on the drying charge. I knew about maybe a dozen. I didn't know it was the whole county." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. 3 farms, she said. "Lord, he bought them back. Which 3? Cole told her the names off the deeds. Verna nodded at each one, slow. "Those families are still on that ground," she said. "Every one of them. Grandkids farming it now, and not a one of them knows." She looked at Cole. "You're going to have to decide what to do with all this, son. That's a heavy thing to hand a boy of 19. But I'll tell you now, there's people in this county that walk around every day standing on land that man gave back to them, and they think they did it themselves, and I don't rightly know if it'd be a kindness or a cruelty to tell them different." Cole did not answer. He had been raised, if you could call it that, to keep other people's secrets, because a foster kid learns fast that the things he knows are the only things that are his. He understood Amos's note. Burn the slips. Do not collect. He had no intention of collecting anything. But he also understood, sitting in that leaning tower with the man's whole life spread on the shelves behind him, that a thing this good was not only Amos's anymore. It belonged, somehow, to the ground and to the people standing on it, whether they knew it or not. He did not have to decide alone, as it turned out, because 11 days after he opened the workshop, the world came up the spur to decide for him. It came in a black SUV, new, riding high, that took the rail bed with none of the care Verna's old Ford had taken, bottoming out on the rotten crossing planks and gunning through. It stopped in the driveway in a skid of gravel, and 3 men got out. 2 wore suits and carried leather folios. The third wore a quarter-zip pullover and pressed jeans, and the kind of boots a man buys to look like he owns land he has never worked, and he came around the front of the SUV, looking up at the elevator with the flat appraising look of a man pricing a thing he means to have. "You, the squatter," the man said. It was not really a question. "I'm the owner," Cole said. The man smiled without any warmth in it. "Garrett Mercer," he said, and waited, as if the name should land. When it didn't, his jaw tightened a fraction. "Mercer. My family built the Ansel County Cooperative. My Uncle Dale ran the co-op board 30 years, he gestured, a small flick of the hand, at the 2 suits behind him. "These gentlemen are with Haverson and Poole, out of Wichita. They represent the co-op's real estate holdings. I represent the family." He looked at Cole, at the duffel bag life of him, at the dog. "So let's not waste each other's afternoon, son. You need to understand your situation." One of the lawyers stepped up and opened his folio and began to explain the situation in the smooth, patient voice of a man who has explained many situations to many people who could not afford to argue. "The land the elevator stood on," he said, "was subject to a ground lease. In 1971, when Amos Deckard built the crib elevator, he had not owned the strip of ground along the rail spur. He had leased it, a 99-year ground lease, from the entity that owned the whole rail corridor, and that entity's interest had been acquired, some years back, by a holding company, and that holding company was controlled by the Mercer family. The lawyer laid a photocopy on the hood of the SUVD. Cole saw a document, dense, initialed, a signature at the bottom he recognized now, the small square hand, a Deckard. The lease, the lawyer said, provides that all improvements on the leased ground, and I quote, including any structures, fixtures, and appurtenances, revert to the lessor upon the death of the lessee or the cessation of the lessee's grain operation, whichever first occurs. Mr. Deckard is deceased. The operation ceased years ago. Under the plain terms of this instrument, the elevator and everything in it reverted to my clients 4 years ago. He closed the folio. The county had no right to auction it. Your $10 deed is a quitclaim, which means the county sold you only whatever interest it had, and the county had none. I'm sorry to tell you that you own nothing but a piece of paper. There was a silence. The wind worked at the loose steel high above them. Now, Garrett Mercer said, stepping in, his voice shifting into a register meant to sound generous. I'm not a hard man. Legally, we don't owe you a dime, and my lawyers will tell you we'd win in an afternoon. But you found this place. You cleaned it up some. I hear you got the pigeons out. That's worth something. He reached into the pocket of his quarter zip and took out a folded check, already made out, and held it up between 2 fingers. $2,000. Right now. You sign a release. You take the dog and your bag, and you walk back to town $2,000 richer than you woke up. That's more money than you've ever held. We both know it. Cole looked at the check. $2,000 was more money than he had ever held. It was true. He did not pretend to himself that it wasn't. $2,000 was a room somewhere for half a year, and boots, and time to find work and stop being a boy who slept in ruins. Why? Cole said. Garrett Mercer blinked. Why what? Why do you want it? Cole said. It's condemned. There's no road to it. The rail's dead. The county carried the taxes 4 years because nobody in that room would pay $10 for it but me. So why did you drive out here with 2 lawyers over a building you say is worth nothing? For just a moment, something flickered behind Garrett Mercer's eyes, and Cole, who had spent his whole life watching faces because his safety depended on reading them, saw it and filed it away. Then the smile came back down over it like a shade. Sentiment, Mercer said smoothly. It's family land, my uncle's legacy. We're cleaning up the holdings. He extended the check another inch. $2,000. It won't be on the table long, son. Once these gentlemen file, I promise you the number goes to 0, and then you're a trespasser, and then it gets unpleasant. And I don't think a kid in your position wants unpleasant with the Mercer family and a Wichita firm. So, he looked at Cole with the patience of a man who has never once in his life been told no by someone who couldn't afford a lawyer. What's it going to be? Cole thought about the deeds in the flat wooden box. He thought about the 3 farms bought at the courthouse steps by a Deckard and handed back for $1. He thought about a rigged scale in 1954 and a boy of 14 watching his father get paid for 800 bushels, what was 1,000. And he thought about how a family gets rich in flat country and how it stays rich. And he looked at Garrett Mercer's pressed jeans and his boots that had never been in a field, and something in him went very quiet and very sure. I'll keep it, Cole said. The driveway went still. Say again, Mercer said. I'll keep the building, Cole said. You can file whatever you want. I'll be here. Garrett Mercer looked at him for a long moment, and the last of the false warmth drained off his face and left the thing that had always been under it, which was a man who was used to winning and did not intend to learn how to lose to a foster kid with a dog. You have no idea what you're doing, he said quietly. None. He folded the check and put it back in his pocket, and this time he did not offer it again. That's fine. We'll do it the other way. My clients will file for possession this week. You'll get served. And when the sheriff comes to put you and that flea bag out on the spur, don't come crying to me about $2,000, because that door is closed. He turned to the lawyers. Photograph everything. The condition, the improvements he's made, all of it. I want a record. He looked back at Cole one last time. Enjoy your building, son. You won't have it long. They photographed the driveway and the broken windows and the sagging shed, and one of the lawyers walked the base of the silos with his phone, and Cole stood in the doorway and let them, because there was nothing in the world he could have done to stop them, and because he did not want them one step closer to the 4th silo than they already were. When the lawyer with the phone came near, the seed pallets stacked against the boiler room door. Cole moved, easy, unhurried, and put himself in the man's path with his hand on Barley's head, and the dog stood up, and the lawyer decided he had photographs enough and went back to the SUV. They loaded up and backed down the spur, bottoming out again on the rotten crossing, and the black SUV pulled out onto the county road and was gone toward town in a thin trail of dust. Cole stood in the quiet a while. Then he went back into the workshop and lit the lantern, and took down the lease copy Verna had told him was somewhere, and found it exactly where the man kept everything, filed, in order, in a drawer under the workbench. The original, the whole 99-year ground lease of 1971, and he sat on Amos Deckard's stool and read every word of it, slowly, twice, the way the man had taught, him without meaning to. And on the last page, below the reversion clause, the lawyer had read aloud so smoothly, was a second paragraph the lawyer had not read, and Cole read it 3 times, and then he sat very still, because he understood that Amos Deckard, who never rounded anything off, who tested his own scale every Monday with his own certified weights, had not been a man to sign away his life's work on another man's paper without reading it first. He needed Verna, and he needed her to bring more than soup. The second paragraph of the lease was 3 sentences long, and Amos Deckard had made the man who owned the rail corridor initial every one of them in 1971, because Amos Deckard did not build a 70-foot building out of solid timber on ground he could be put off of. It read that the lessee, and whoever should thereafter lawfully hold title to the improvements erected upon the demised premises, should have the perpetual right and option to purchase the demised premises in fee simple, absolute for the sum of $1, exercisable at any time, and that this option should run with the improvements and bind the lessor and every successor to the lessor's interest forever. And then, so there could be no argument, a final sentence, in language that had plainly been Amos's own and not a lawyer's. The purpose of this option is that no man who owns the building shall ever be put off the ground beneath it against his will, and it shall be read in favor of the owner of the building. Cole read it, and then he read the reversion clause the lawyer had recited, and he understood the whole shape of it. The reversion clause said the improvements went back to the Mercers when Amos died, but the option said that whoever lawfully held title to the building could buy the ground out from under the Mercers for $1 forever. And Cole lawfully held title to the building. He had a quitclaim deed from Ansel County, stamped and recorded, for the Deckard elevator, bought at public auction for $10 in front of 30 witnesses. He did not know if it would hold. He was 19, and he had never been in a courtroom that was not deciding something about him. But he knew a true weight when he saw one, because a dead man had spent 4 nights teaching him, and he knew that Garrett Mercer and the firm out of Wichita had read him the half of the lease that suited them and hidden the half that did not, the same way a crooked scale shows a man the half of the weight that suits the buyer. Verna Stroud came that Sunday, and Cole did not let her sit down before he had the lease in her hands. She read it twice, her lips moving on the second paragraph, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright and hard. "Get your coat," she said, "and bring the books. All of them. We're going to see somebody who's owed a look at these for 40 years. The person Verna Stroud drove him to was not a lawyer. It was a farmer, a big, slow man in his 60s named Harlan Voss, and Verna sat him down at his own kitchen table and set one of Amos Deckard's ledgers in front of him, opened to a page in the drought year of 2011, and put her finger on a line. Harlan Voss looked at it a long time. It was his own name. It was a load of drought-burned wheat that had graded feed grade, worth almost nothing, and beside it, in the margin, a figure, and the word carried, and the initials a D. "That's the fall my dad near lost the home place," Harlan Voss said slowly. "We hauled the whole crop, and it came back feed. I remember Dad sat in the truck in Amos's driveway and couldn't hardly start it. We were done, and Amos came out and handed him an envelope and said the price of feed wheat had come up sudden that morning on account of something in the cattle market, and it was near $4,000, and it made the loan payment." He looked up at Verna. "There wasn't no cattle market, was there?" "No, Harlan," Verna said gently. "There wasn't." Cole watched a grown man's face come apart slowly at a kitchen table over a thing that had been done for him 14 years before by a man now 4 years dead, and he understood that this was going to happen more than once, and that it needed to. It happened 11 times over the next 3 days. Verna knew where every family in those ledgers lived, because she had weighed their grain for 29 years, and she drove Cole up one section road and down the next in the old Ford with 214,000 miles on it. And at every kitchen table, she opened a book and put a finger on a line and let the people read their own names in the margins where Amos Deckard had carried them. She showed the 3 families their deeds. She showed the Kessler family the record of their quarter section bought at the courthouse steps by a Deckard in 1988 and handed back to them for $1, and old Ruth Kessler, who was 80 and had believed for 37 years that the bank had shown her family a mercy, put both hands over her mouth and could not speak. By the 4th day, half of Ansel County knew that the boy who had bought the Deckard elevator for $10 was being run off it by the Mercers, and that the building the county had laughed at was full of the truth about who had really held the county together through the bad years. And in a place like Halden, where a family is most of what a person is, that truth traveled faster than any lawyer's letter. The Mercers filed their action for possession, as promised, and the county set a hearing, because the elevator sat on the county's tax rolls and the county had sold it, and the district judge wanted the whole tangle in one room. It was held in the same basement meeting room of the courthouse where Cole had raised his hand for Lot 41 under the same fluorescent lights, 2 of which still flickered. This time there were no empty folding chairs. They came in from every section road in the county. They came in seed caps and Sunday coats. Harlanvoss came, and the Kesslers, all of them, 4 generations, and the other 2 families off the deeds, and dozens of others whose names were written in the margins of 41 ledgers, and dozens more who had only heard. And they filled the folding chairs, and then they filled the walls, standing 3 deep at the back where Cole had stood, until the fire marshal came and looked in and decided. This was not a day to count heads. Garrett Mercer came in his suit now, no quarter zip, with the 2 lawyers from Wichita, and Cole saw the moment the man understood the room he had walked into, saw him take in the crowd and the faces and fail to find a single friendly one, and saw the first thin crack of doubt go across his face. The lawyer from Haverson and Poole stood and read the reversion clause in his smooth, patient voice, and explained that Amos Deckard's interest had ended at his death, and that the county had sold what it did not own, and that the boy owned nothing. And he sat down confident. Then Verna Stroud stood up, 71 years old, in her canvas coat, and asked the judge if she might hand up a document, and she gave the bailiff the original lease of 1971, and she asked him to read the 2nd paragraph, the one the Wichita firm had left in the drawer. And the bailiff read it aloud, every word, the perpetual option to purchase the ground for $1, running forever with the building, to whoever lawfully held title to the building, to be read in favor of the owner of the building. And then he read Amos Deckard's own last sentence, that no man who owned the building should ever be put off the ground beneath it against his will, and the basement room, which had grown very quiet, made a low sound like wind moving over stubble. Cole stood up when the judge asked him to. He was not good at talking. He had never been good at talking. So he did the only thing he knew how to do, which was tell the true weight of it plain. I own the building, he said. I bought it from the county for $10 in this room, and it's recorded. The lease says whoever owns the building can buy the ground for $1, anytime, forever, and it says to read it in favor of the owner. He reached into his coat and set a single dollar bill on the table in front of the judge, folded flat the way he folded all his money, and smoothed it once. I'd like to buy the ground, he said. That's the $1. I'll wait for the receipt. There was a silence, and then somewhere in the packed room somebody started to laugh. But it was not the laugh from the auction. It was the other kind. The kind that comes up out of people when a thing that should be true turns out against all expectation to be true, and it spread through the folding chairs and up the walls, warm, and Cole stood in the middle of it holding nothing but the empty air, where his $1 had been. The judge did not rule that day. Judges do not. But he took the lease, and he took the $1 into the custody of the court, and he told the Wichita firm that he would want to hear their explanation of why the second paragraph of a two-paragraph clause had not been in their filing, and Cole watched the two lawyers not look at each other, and he understood that the thing was already decided, whatever the paper would say in 6 weeks. It was outside, on the courthouse steps, in the gray afternoon, that the last of it happened, and it was not in any courtroom. Garrett Mercer came down the steps fast, wanting his SUV, and the crowd was there on the steps and the sidewalk, and it did not part for him the way crowds had parted for Mercers in Ansel County for 50 years. It just stood and looked at him, farmer after farmer, silent, in the flat, patient way that Cole knew from the inside. The way a man looks at a scale he no longer trusts. Nobody touched him. Nobody said a word. That was the whole of it. And it was worse than anything anyone could have said. Old Ruth Kessler was at the front, and Garrett Mercer had to pass close by her to reach his car, and she did not curse him. She only looked at him, and then she looked away, deliberately, the way you look away from a thing that has been weighed and found short, and one by one, all down the steps, the others did the same. Garrett Mercer got into his black SUV and shut the door on a county that had, in the space of an afternoon, quietly and forever decided what he was, and he drove away, and he did not come back. Verna Stroud found Cole at the edge of the crowd with Barley leaned against his leg. "You know what your building was in the way of," she said. It was not a question. She had found out, the way she found out everything. That dead corridor. The state's buying the whole rail line for a trail, Wichita to the county line, and there's an outfit wants the easement for a power line besides. And it's real money, and they couldn't close a dime of it while the Deckard parcel had a cloud on the title. That's why he drove out over a building worth nothing. It was worth nothing to everybody but him, because it was the one thing standing in the way of him getting paid. She shook her head. Amos put a boy who slept in a bus shelter in the way of a Mercer payday. And he did it 40 years before you were born, with 3 sentences and $1. That man, she wiped her eyes. That man. The ruling came in June, on a single sheet of paper, and it was as plain as the lease. The option ran with the improvements. Cole Rennick lawfully held title to the improvements. Cole Rennick had tendered the sum of $1 and exercised the option according to its terms. The court ordered the ground conveyed to him in fee, simple, absolute, and it directed a few sharp sentences at the firm of Haverson and Poole about the duty of candor toward a tribunal that Cole did not fully understand but that Verna read twice with great satisfaction. The Mercer Holding Company's grand deal for the corridor went through anyway, in the end, minus the one parcel it could no longer touch, and Cole never learned exactly what it had been worth and did not care to. What he cared about was the sheet of paper that said the ground was his, 40 feet on either side of the dead spur, and the leaning tower on it, both free and clear, for $11 all told and $1 more. He did with the ledgers what Amos Deckard had asked. He did not collect 1 cent. On a still evening in July, he carried the gray steel cash box out to the driveway and built a small fire in an old feed pan, and he burned the slips, every one, the whole record of what the county owed a dead man, the way the note had told whoever found it to do, and he watched the debts go up in thin smoke over the stubble and felt them lift off the shoulders of people who had never known they carried them. The ledgers themselves he kept. The grade books, the honest weights, 41 years of a true scale, those he did not burn, because those were not debts. Those were the man. The rest of it, the county would not let him do alone, and that was the part Cole had not expected and did not know how to refuse. They came out the spur in trucks. Harlan Voss came first, with a load of lumber and a nail gun and 2 of his boys, and he did not ask, he just started on the driveway shed, because a man who has been carried looks for 40 years for a way to carry something back. The Kesslers came. The other 2 families off the deeds came. Men Cole had met at kitchen tables came with ladders and sheet steel and a boom truck to reach the head house, and the women came with food enough that Cole, who had been living on bread and peanut butter since March, did not know what to do with his hands. They tore off the rotten shed roof and framed a new one in a weekend. They glazed the broken windows. They replaced the peeled siding, and where the old sign had faded, they got a man who did lettering to bring it back, Deckard grain, and below it, in the same hand it had always been, fair weight, fair price. Cole would not let them change the name. It had been offered, once, gently, whether he might want it to say Rennick now that it was his, and he had said no before the man had finished the sentence. It was Deckard's. He was only keeping it. Verna Stroud found him purpose, too, which was the thing a boy of 19 needed even more than a roof. The state was making its trail down the old corridor, and a trail needs a place partway along it where people stop, and the restored elevator on the dead spur, it turned out, was exactly 2 miles from town and exactly the kind of tall, strange, beautiful thing that people would walk out to see. The county leased the driveway bay from Cole, and paid him rent, real rent, monthly, to keep it open as a way station and a small museum of how the county's wheat had once moved and who had moved it. They put the ledgers under glass, open to pages Verna chose, the honest columns, the true weights, and beside them a plain card that told, at last, the whole of what Amos Deckard had done, because the families had talked it over among themselves and decided that Ruth Kessler was wrong, that it was not a cruelty to know, that a county ought to know the name of the man who had carried it. Cole ran the place. He kept it swept and warm and open, and he answered questions when people asked them and stayed quiet when they didn't, which suited him. And he tested the old platform scale in the driveway every Monday morning with Amos's own certified weights, not because anything crossed it anymore, but because it was the thing the man had done, and doing it kept the man in the building. He slept in the office still, but it was a room now, with the wool blanket Verna had brought and a real bed the Voss boys had hauled out, and a window that closed. Barley slept across the doorsill, the brown dog under the scale, 40 years and counting. On an evening in September, a year and a half after the caseworker's car, Cole climbed the man lift up through the 4th silo, the way Amos must have climbed it 10,000 times, up past the workshop, up the long, dark shaft, and out through the little door onto the catwalk at the top of the headhouse, 70 feet up, where the whole county lay out flat and gold under a low sun. The wheat was long in from the summer harvest, and the ground was turned dark for the fall, and the new trail ran off south toward town, and here and there across the sections stood the lights of farms, coming on one at a time as the dusk came down. He knew a lot of those lights by name now. He knew which ones stood on ground a man had bought back at the courthouse steps for $1 and handed over so quietly that the family thanked the bank. He knew which kitchen tables had wept over a ledger. He knew, standing up there in the last of the light, more about the true weight of Ansel County than any man alive, except the one whose coat still hung on the nail by the office door, where Cole had left it and would leave it. He had come to this place with $47 and a duffel bag with a broken zipper, and no one in the world who knew where he was standing. He stood now on the top of a thing that was his, that could not be taken, on ground a dead man had reached 40 years into the future to put under his feet, in a county that knew his name and set his change in his hand now instead of on the counter. He was not rich. He would never be rich. But he had learned the thing the old grain man had built his whole life to teach, and had taught him without ever once meeting him, through 41 ledgers and 3 sentences of a lease and $1 folded flat. A scale does not just weigh the grain. Down at the bottom, past the tare and the moisture and the market price of the day, an honest scale weighs the man who built it, and the man who reads it, and every man who trusted it in a bad year and was not cheated. Amos Deckard had known that at 14, watching his father get paid for 800 bushels what was 1,000. He had spent 40 years proving it in a room under a silo where no one could see. And now a boy who had been thrown away by everything that was supposed to hold him stood at the top of the proof, in the gold light, with a brown dog somewhere below him and a county coming on in lights, and understood it all the way down. An honest scale weighs the man, not just the grain. Cole stood on the catwalk until the sun was gone and the cold came up out of the fields, and then he climbed back down through the dark heart of the elevator, past the workshop and its ledgers, past the coat on its nail, and he stepped out into the driveway where Barley was waiting, and the two of them stood a moment in the blue dusk, side by side, watching the wind move over the stubble the way it would go on doing long after both of them, the way it had done for the honest man before them. And then they went in, and Cole rolled the door shut behind them, and the lights of the old Deckard elevator came on at the north end of the dead spur, warm, for the first time in 4 years, and stayed on.